Hi, in this video, we're going to be talking about the properties of parallelograms. The properties of parallelograms. This is section 6.2 in our book, just in case you want to look up videos. Let's get started. If quadrilateral is a parallelogram, then opposite sides are parallel. So I'm going to mark these with the parallel symbols. Okay, parallel. Hence the name parallelogram. But the opposite sides are also, so I'm going to also mark these sides congruent as well. If a quadrilateral is a parallelogram, then the opposite angles are congruent. So let's mark these angles the same size, and these angles the same size. Those are the opposite angles. If a quadrilateral is a parallelogram, then the consecutive angles are supplementary. And supplementary means that they add up to 180. Okay, consecutive angles are basically next to each other or on the same side. For example, these two angles right here are consecutive angles. As we round the parallelogram, there would be one and this would be the next one. So those are consecutive angles. And they're supplementary. So they add up to 180. All right, and these two add to 180. And these two add to 180. And these two add to 180 because they're consecutive angles. So like, for example, these could be 120 degrees, and these could be 60-degree angles. All right, if a quadrilateral is a parallelogram, then the diagonals bisect each other. So a diagonal, recall, is when you draw a segment from one vertex to a non-consecutive vertex. Okay, so that would be one diagonal. And then this is another diagonal. Well, they just so happen to cut each other in half, bisect each other. So these little segments out here are going to be equal to each other. So remember, with a parallelogram, the diagonals are not necessarily equal. There's a long one and a short one. So here's a picture of, maybe another type of parallelogram. See how there's one long one and one short one? The diagonals? But they still are bisected, okay? Let's go over that one more time. There are 5 properties of a parallelogram. If the quadrilateral is a parallelogram, then both pairs of opposite sides are parallel. If the quadrilateral is a parallelogram, then both pairs of opposite sides are congruent. If the quadrilateral is a parallelogram, then both pairs of opposite angles are congruent. If the quadrilateral is a parallelogram, then consecutive angles are supplementary. And last but not least, if the quadrilateral is a parallelogram, then the diagonals bisect each other. Let's do an example problem. Here the directions say to state the property and solve. So here I have an x, a y. Okay, so here's a couple of x's. And this is a parallelogram. So I know that the property is that if the quadrilateral is a parallelogram, then the consecutive angles are supplementary. So I'm able to write the equation x plus 8 plus 3x equals 180, and then solve for that. Then I can solve for the y by plugging this x value in here or here. So if I did these two, it would be the consecutive angles are supplementary again, or I could do these two where opposite angles are congruent. So I think I'll do the opposite angles are congruent. Set up the equation 3 times 43 equals y plus 9. So this is 129 equals y plus 9, and then I subtract 9 from both sides. Y is equal to 120. For the next equation, or next problem, we have algebraic expressions on the diagonals. And so we have our property, the diagonals bisect each other. So I know that this segment and this segment, they're on the same diagonal, they are equal to each other. So I can set 4x minus 2 equal to x plus 10 and solve. And then I can set the other two parts of the diagonal equal to each other since it was bisected as well. So y plus 5 equals 3y minus 1. One more example practice problem. Write an equation that will allow you to find a and b. Of course, we have to know that we have a parallelogram first. So given that w, x, y, z is a parallelogram. All right, so because we have a parallelogram, we know both pairs of opposite sides would be congruent. So a plus 14 is going to equal 6a plus 4. Okay, and it just says to write an equation. We also know that the other pair of opposite sides are congruent. So that would mean that 9b plus 8 is equal to 11b plus 1. I'm sorry, 10b plus 1. And here's my two equations.